So Salam Sheikh.
Alaikum salam. How are you, dear Salim?
I'm very good, thank you. Thank you for joining us again on the podcast. I mentioned to you just before, and I think it's worth mentioning for our listeners as well, that I was looking yesterday, and the previous episode that we recorded together is the second most listened to TMV podcast, which is quite something. So thank you, congratulations. I don't know, yeah, thank you for being a guest the first time around and for agreeing to come on again. But we've also
Thank
had a lot of feedback on the podcast episode, emails that have come in and messages, and it seems to have really kind of resonated with people. So no pressure this time around.
Alhamdulillah, Alhamdulillah. I'm so happy to hear that we managed to connect to the amazing viewers and the listeners. I hope, inshallah, we can have another good episode again this time, hopefully.
Inshallah. This time the situation is slightly different. We're obviously sitting remotely, and
Yeah,
we've been speaking for a while now, for a couple of weeks, in fact maybe even months, about doing another podcast, and you've been umming and ahhing a little bit, and you said that you weren't in the right kind of headspace, but then
yeah,
the last couple of days when I suggested again let's do something in the month of Ramadan, you were quite keen, quite on it, and there was a particular post of yours on Instagram, which I'm going to read out, and I thought it would be worth starting with that and asking you to kind of talk a little bit about that, and then we can kind of move on from there.
sure.
But you basically said, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but you said, being alone is not the same as spending time with yourself. You may end up spending time with your thoughts, and your thoughts are not you. Even months of being alone with your thoughts may not lead to self-knowledge. And then you quote the Quran and various other bits. So, okay, firstly, that quote is from yourself, right? It's not like a Rumi quote that you've ripped off.
No, 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 no.
Okay.
At least not consciously. No, it's from me. Yeah.
Can you elaborate a little bit more about that, and like, where the origin of that kind of post comes from in your own head?
Yeah. I think the main problem that we have now it's it's become even worse in these days that we're all at home and we're trying to spend some quality me time every now and then,
Mm.
is that we don't really know who we are, so we don't know what is it or who is it that we should be alone with. And usually if a person, for example, goes to their room and tries to sit down on a chair or lie down on a bed, close their eyes and try to think, be with themselves, what they will experience is that a lot of thoughts will come to their mind, and it seems like we're having a conversation with ourselves. We're listening to the thoughts. Like, imagine you're sitting down and you're like, all right, so this is what's happened, like, okay, I'm here, like, it's been the lockdown, we don't know how more, like, it's a conversation going on in our head.
Yeah.
And we feel like, well, it's just me here, so this must be what me time is. I'm spending time with myself. The problem is that we don't know where is the source of these thoughts, and so we identify with them. So, okay, this is me. However, what I was trying to say in that post is that we need to learn, where do these thoughts come from, and then that would help us understand whether we want to identify with this part, or is there a deeper part of us that we need to connect to, which is beyond thoughts. And it's that which they mean when they say you have to have self-knowledge.
So I don't want to interrupt you here, but I do want to jump in for a second, because
yeah,
I think the natural thing for people to do is to associate themselves with their inner thoughts. So that, like, that soundtrack that you've got going on in your head, like you said, when you're sitting and you're thinking whatever, you've just said something that for some people, including myself to an extent, is a little bit shocking, that we are not just our thoughts. If that's not that voice in our head is not us. And you're alluding to kind of a deeper existence beyond that, which is I've got to say a little bit daunting, because the assumption from there is that we haven't necessarily even connected or understood who we are at our essence, because we haven't even tapped into that level of conversation with ourselves. Am I getting lost, or does that make sense?
Exactly. Exactly. And it's very shocking, but it's also very promising. The shocking thing is that you may realize, oh, what? So you're telling me that the person I thought I am, I was basing my decisions on these thoughts, everything. So you're saying that that wasn't all of me. And I think that is true. And hopefully, maybe throughout this episode, I'll try to convince the listeners of what I'm
Start with
trying to say.
convincing me, because I'm not sold yet.
Perfect. That's even better. So see, I think the best way we can start and go about this is to look at what is the source of these thoughts, right? What happens when suddenly we get these thoughts? And then we'll see how random sometimes they can be and how they're often triggered by things which are not in our power, right? So imagine we're doing this podcast, right? So the thoughts which are coming to your mind right now probably have to do with this setting. Okay, I hope the recording's done one. I hope, for example, by the end of it, the audio doesn't have a problem. So we have to tell Sheikh Javad that we're sorry, the podcast, all these thoughts which are relevant to the setting you are in right now, right? Or for me as well. Well, I hope there's no issue. I hope my battery phone doesn't die. Now imagine if we were a different room, right? We would have totally different thoughts. Imagine if you were right now, for example, with your family. You're like, okay, I hope we're having a good family time, right? So the setting you are in affects the kind of thoughts that you have, right? Now, can you say that you would have been a different person if you were outside? It's the same person. What happens around you changes the thoughts you have, which means that you can have a totally different thought, but be the same person, right? At least parts of your thoughts. It is completely based on where you are, what you're doing. You could be in a different room having different thoughts, talking to a different person, right? So in a way, we can say that at least this part is based on what's happening around us, right?
Yeah.
So we don't need to hold on to them that dearly and say, these are my dear thoughts, Well, you're in this situation, these thoughts are coming. And so sometimes external factors, like who we're talking to, where we are the reason that thoughts come to our mind, right? And of course, we can say that, yes, but these are my thoughts about this environment. And to some extent, that is true, right? But I'm saying that you can't own everything about the thought. Of course, it's going through the filter of you, but the fact that it even came, you didn't start the thought, right? If you actually sit down one day when you're alone and try to see where do thoughts come, right? You realize that they come into your consciousness without you initiating it. And then the question is, okay, where are they coming from, right? So I think that's the first step to start slowly understanding that maybe we're not fully in charge of the thoughts.
Can I add on to that? So by extension of the logic that you've just put out, that our thoughts dictated by our surroundings, I think
Some of them,
arguably,
yeah,
some of them, I think arguably
yeah,
at the same time, our actions are also dictated by our surroundings. So for example, if you put someone who's susceptible to peer pressure into a situation where people are smoking, he might
mm-hmm.
take up the habit, and it's not because he is a smoker, like at his
Yeah,
essence, but it's because he's
yeah,
influenced by his surroundings. So it comes back to the initial point, which is like, who the hell are we? If
exactly.
we're not our actions and we're not our thoughts,
Yeah,
then and I think the reason that we wanted to also have this conversation is because we're in a state currently of self-isolation where people are not living their lives in a normal way. They're not going to work. They're not interacting. And what's happened is that I feel like there's elements of existential crises that are developing in people's heads
yeah,
simply by virtue of the fact that they no longer have the noise around them of the world. And
mm-hmm.
so and so, like, a lot of us have sunk into a routine, and again, then I'm thinking to myself, am I just my routine? Like, is this my life? Is my
Yeah,
life just me,
mm.
working, spending time with my family, watching TV, going to sleep? And I guess the repercussions of that manifest themselves differently in different people. Some people will
Yeah,
just kind of turn off that side of their brain and be like, okay, you know what? I'm just going to sink into my routine and enjoy just being.
yeah,
But it's thrown up a lot of thoughts in people's heads, I think. Um, so I guess the next question is, how do we it sounds so weird, but how do we discover ourselves,
yeah, yeah,
at our essence?
yeah. Yeah, of course. And I think you mentioned a very important point, because, because I was just talking about it at the level of thoughts, but you said that this can even impact our actions, which is completely true,
Hmm.
right? So not only we thought thoughts which are not completely ours, but we then act upon that, right? And those behaviors in some ways really affect our life. You must have heard this example, I mean, or as a father, you may even had experience of this. Like sometimes you're trying to feed your child, right? And just because some food is there, you might put some of it in your mouth, right? And
Hmm.
I think this example was in the book we were discussing
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yesterday, right? Now, imagine in that case, right? Just because happening to be next to some food, right?
Yeah.
You take it and so these thoughts which come from the external world may even affect the way we act. Now, you're correct. Now, because a lot of us are in this situation where we have to spend a lot of time home, so a lot of these external factors are now removed. Of course, external factors, anything which is out of our mind, so it could even be, just like a person sitting next to us or family, whoever, but still it's very much limited. Like, we're not going to see our colleagues that much or at all. We're not going to the cafe. So what happens is that the other part, which I said is another source of what is becoming more and more loud, because there's no competing voice with it. And that is the inner part of us, which can communicate with us through thoughts. Now, this may seem a little bit crazy, but it's nothing crazy at all. It's very obvious to, if you think about it, right? Usually I try to start talking about it by the example of a perfume, right? Imagine you're somewhere and you sense a perfume, and suddenly it takes you back 15 years ago to a memory you had, for example, with your cousin, or I don't know, someone their friend. And I always say, this memory, where was it all this time, right? It was such an important thing for you. It was a close friend or a cousin that you were really close to at childhood. 15 years of your life, it made no difference in your, in your, as much as you were aware of it. A perfume suddenly comes, and this memory comes back to you, right? Now, where was that memory all those 15 years ago? And it seems like where that was, there are other things as well. So there are part of our life, memories, or for example, things which we are insecure about, or insecurities, right? Things which we were hurt about. There's a part of us which all of these are there, but usually in our day-to-day life, we may not remember them, right? They may not come to our, conscious level. So these will affect us. And as I said, sometimes something outside triggers and they come out. Like, for
Mm.
example, the perfume that brought the memory back from 15 years ago, or sometimes with insecurities as well. Something outside. You could be at home watching a TV show, right? There's a character which has probably a physical feature you didn't want and you're insecure about. Immediately, that insecurity that I had, for example, comes out,
It triggers,
right?
yeah.
It's triggered. And how does that communicate with me? Through thoughts or emotions. So these are another source of thought, right? So let's say I'm seeing this TV series. There's a character which has something I'm insecure about. Suddenly, all these thoughts come into my mind, right? Oh, you should have taken the weight loss more seriously, right? Or for example, you shouldn't have done this. You should have, or sometimes it could even be emotions, right? This is not even a good series anymore, right? I may not even be aware what's happening. Why am I not liking this anymore? I just feel bad about the series, right? What I don't know is that this is triggered an insecurity inside me, right?
Mm.
So, so these insecurities, these past memories, these things that we've pushed down, could also be another source of thoughts. And this is why I said in that post that being alone, sometimes all you're doing is you're talking, you're listening to these thoughts, which basically means you're alone with your insecurities, with your stresses, with your fears.
Yeah.
And that's the worst part of yourself to be alone with, right?
It's, I think, like, reflecting on my own experience the last few weeks, I feel like I've had a heightened awareness of my thoughts, because
Mm-hmm.
of the less noise around us. But at the
Yeah.
same time, I feel, I don't want to say helpless, but more incapable of dealing with them. Does that make
Mm-hmm.
sense?
Yeah, yeah,
Because
yes, yes.
I feel like, you know, we okay, I know what I'm thinking now, and I'm able to process it because I have the time and I have the mental space to do that. But then
Yeah.
it's like, okay, I'm thinking XYZ. Now,
Hmm.
now, what are we supposed to do with that? Do you know what I mean? There's like,
Yeah,
it's as you said. I think we have the awareness that we have bad traits or habits or behaviors or whatever it might be, or even thoughts generally.
yeah,
And acknowledging and understanding that is kind of one is almost the first step. But
yeah,
then how do we, I guess, implement change? And that's the
yeah,
difficulty. And you alluded to the book that we discussed. Maybe we'll get onto that in a bit.
yeah.
The book was The Power of Habit by, I wrote down his name because I always forget it, Chris Duhigg. Duhigg, any idea on
Yes, do it. Yeah.
pronunciation? Duhigg.
Yes, yes,
um
yeah.
and that book has been really interesting as well. So I've recently started listening to that, and I think we can talk about habits, because I feel like a big part of this, beyond thoughts and actions and whatever else, is actually moving into looking at our habits. And like, just before we, I mean, we'll come back to talking about change and everything else, but one thing I just wanted to say right now, I wanted to state right now, is that so many of our actions are just habitual actions, which we mindlessly undertake. So
Yeah.
if you think about the fact that, like, for myself, especially after iftar, I have to have something sweet. Like, I have to
Hmm.
have a chocolate or an ice cream or whatever, and I'm not even thinking about it, and I'm walking over to the freezer, opening and pulling out a Snickers
Yeah.
ice cream bar. I'm fasting right now, so I'm already like salivating just at the thought of
Oh,
it,
yes.
right?
Yeah.
But it's so interesting when you suddenly start analyzing your day, and even the most like simple things, like waking up, picking up your phone and going through your messages, like trying
Yeah.
to break a habit like that. And we've had someone on the podcast in the past that's talked about breaking habits and spending the first half an hour of your day not on technology, not on your phone.
Hmm.
And I was like, oh, that's actually a really good idea. I really like that, but I couldn't implement it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And again, like, I feel like we lack the tools for change.
Yes.
um so do you have any advice or thoughts before we get on to kind of talking about habits, but just
Yeah.
generally, once we've had an understanding of things, what do we do with that?
Yeah. Well, yeah, exactly. I think, the main thing that we need is that understanding. Like, if we know how the thoughts work, how the habits work, what are these deep systems behind them that create these patterns and don't allow us to change them, I think the main thing that can help us is to learn about it. How is it working? How was it, uh, put there in the first place? So that's why I think, if it's okay, if we talk a little bit more about this, then we can get to the change part. But by the
Okay.
time we get to the change part, we know how it's done. And it like a very good understanding would help us in implementing the change, because we know what is it exactly we're going after.
Hmm.
So I just want to take us back to what you said earlier, that you said now thoughts are becoming, and you feel you have a heightened awareness of your thoughts. And the issue is, okay, how do you deal with them then, right? And I think this is, one of the reasons that this could happen for some of us is that in other days we had, we had learned a system of how to deal with our thoughts, which wasn't exactly the best, which was we would distract ourselves from our thoughts, or naturally it would happen for us, right? So we push them away.
Yeah.
But even then, it wouldn't let us go. So usually we would have, for example, if we had a stressful day, if there was this thought that we pushed away, it would come back to us when we're trying to sleep, because then there was no more distractions, unless we were super tired. Like some people, that's how they sleep. They make sure their body is so tired that as soon as they put their head on the pillow, they're gone, right? You're like, thoughts, I won. But for a lot of people, the thoughts that they've been pushing away during the day come back to them at night, because I said anything you push down, it communicates with you. It won't go anywhere. So now what's happened is that the whole day seems to be the time that we put our head on the bed, because the thought just has this time. There's nothing to distract us from it. So it's like we're just spending so much time with them alone, and they have more time to catch up with us. But the issue is, some people say, and I think it's just such an amazing idea, that if you try to solve thoughts by thoughts, it's as if, for example, there's ripple on a swimming pool, like there's someone throw a stone and there's a small ripple, and now you want to jump in the swimming pool to make sure the water settles, the ripple is gone, right? They say when you engage with thoughts, you can't settle it down. You just give it more energy, the ripples become more and more. So if we want to make sure we can deal with these thoughts, we can calm them down, we need to learn something deeper than, combating them with thoughts. And I think that's why I said it's so important to learn to disengage, disidentify from thoughts.
Yeah.
And it's only sometimes by disengaging from them that we can finally stop them, right? But not pushing them away, right? So there are so many ways to deal with a thought. You can engage with it. For example, it says, oh my God, this deadline is approaching and you're really stressed about it. You try to talk yourself out of this, right? Talk to your thoughts. Oh, I've done this, it's going to be okay. Well, the more you talk to it, the stronger it becomes. You may push it. Yeah.
I was going to say, if I can just jump in, the way that I see it based on what you're discussing, and tell me if I'm right or not. Like,
sure.
So I always have this issue on my clothes where, when there's like a little thread that's hanging out. And either you pull it, and when you pull it, it's just going to keep going, and then all of a sudden your clothes are going to be ruined, or you leave it. And for me, when I leave it, it just bugs me to no end until I have to pull it. And I feel, at least the way that I look at thoughts is exactly the same. Either I have thoughts and I just suppress them and like, what, I don't want to deal with that right now, but it's always still there. Or I deal with it and you just get deeper and deeper in and you get more lost in the thoughts.
Yeah.
Is that an adequate metaphor?
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. And by the end of it, you're stuck with a long thread and no shirt, right?
Exactly.
I think that's beautiful. And the problem is that, we weren't taught the third option, right? Which is how to just be okay with that thing being there, right? Without feeling the need to either pull it or without allowing it to really mess up your mind. Oh, why is it there? Why is it there? Right? The third option was just to learn to be okay with that, right? And this is perhaps the most important thing we can learn in our life. And I would even suggest that this is why fasting was recommended in the first place, right? The way we deal with fasting usually, unfortunately, is we push down, right? Hunger comes, like we push it down. Dude, 4 hours left to iftar. I'll see you at, 8:30, and I'll give you that Snickers bar that you're asking for, right? So pushing down. And this way, it doesn't do much for us because it just strengthens this habit of pushing down, suppressing, which we were already masters at, right? So that's why we have so many hadiths in the Islamic literature. I'd say a lot of people fast, but the only gain they have is a few hours of hunger, no spiritual gain whatsoever.
Yeah.
Because if all we're doing is suppress it, push it down, so that a few hours we can address it, it doesn't really help us learn anything. But initially, I think what it was meant to do was to learn us experience hunger, right? And start to be okay with the uncomfortable energy that hunger creates in us, right? So hunger would come. Now what happened? As soon as hunger comes, I'm like, I'm hungry, right? Immediately we identify with the hunger. I'm hungry, and I either have to eat while I'm fasting. I can't, so I'll push it down. You know what? I'll see in 4 hours. Go down. So we are so shocked by the presence of hunger that we need to push it down right away. Whereas what we could do instead was, and expect this and be okay with it, right? So the next time, for example, hunger would come, we try to see, okay, how does hunger feel? All right, so this hunger, okay, it's a sensation in my stomach. Or thirst. Oh, thirst is this feeling I have in my throat. You just sit with it slowly, and you try to look at it from a distance, not allowing it to, color your whole experience of life. But you distance yourself a little bit from your hunger, and like, okay, so this is what hunger is. Hunger is a little bit of sensations in my stomach and in my throat, and it seems like I can actually sit with it. Yeah, it's uncomfortable, And it's very interesting because if anyone really has paid attention to hunger or any other thing, they say that it comes out of nowhere. It seems like it's coming out of nowhere, right? Like you're having your day, suddenly you're hungry, right?
Mm.
And it's so interesting to just sit and observe this. Oh, hunger came, right? I have this feeling in my stomach. I have this thing, my throat is dry, thirst came. And also it's sending thoughts to me. Like it's saying, oh, I want this food. All these thoughts again. I said, it's not me. This is my hunger talking to me, right? As soon as hunger comes, thoughts come as well. Oh, how lovely it would be to have that food. How lovely, lovely it would be to have a cup of coffee. So
Mm.
you see, oh my God, this thing came, it's sending thoughts, it's sending feelings. And it's very interesting. As you observe it, you'll see that it will go on its own. And I'm sure many people have had this experience without maybe paying attention to it, that they're hungry and half an hour later, they're not. So I think fasting was there to help us sit with an uncomfortable experience without feeling the need to either express it or suppress it. Just experience it. Let it use all its energy so you don't have to push it down. And if you deal with your hunger like this, then at the time of iftar, there's nothing suppressed, nothing pushed down. So you don't need to, like destroy the fridge. No, you can simply eat as much as you want. And hunger, of course, for some people, if hunger has become an addiction for them, like overeating issues they have, it may not be an easy thing to start with. But for many people, hunger and thirst are things they can start with to learn to sit with uncomfortable experiences. And this can help on later on, to help with insecurities, with fears, with thoughts about something that don't go away, to just sit with them, and not feel the need to either, deal with them, as you said, like pull the thread, or just let it just mess up your mind. Oh, why is this there? So so I think that's even what fasting was there for.
That's really beautiful. I never thought of it like that, and I think this is obviously why I wanted to have this conversation with you, just to get some kind of insight. Like I think for me personally, one thing that I've observed when it comes to fasting specifically is that before I used to have to eat my iftar straight away at Maghrib time, and then I would pray afterwards, and it would be a sluggish and awful salah that I'd be praying.
Yeah,
And then I don't know when exactly, but at some point a few years ago, iftar time kind of kicked in, and there's been, I think maybe it was a few times like I was on the road and I wasn't yet home. Like you go to drop something off to someone's house and then you don't make it back in time, and I was like, right, so I'm hungry and I'm thirsty, and I can legally break my fast, but I don't
yeah,
have any food or water.
yeah,
And I could have either stopped off at a service station or just waited 15 minutes till I got home.
yeah,
And when you kind of wait that 15 minutes, you're like, right, like you're saying, right, you can actually live with the hunger and the thirst. And I
exactly.
see it like it's 10 more minutes, it's 15 more minutes before I'm done praying and whatever. I
Yeah.
I can survive. And then likewise, when I sit
Mm,
down on the table, it's not about attacking and jumping in and whatever, but like you eat, and as you say, you eat
yeah,
to your contentment. But it's and like alhamdulillah, I'm generally quite okay when it comes to the hunger and thirst of fasting. I get really tired,
yeah.
and my body clock is all over the place in the holy month, but that's
Mm,
a kind of separate issue. Maybe we can do another
yeah.
podcast on how to sleep better in Ramadan. But yeah, no, it's interesting. But then to compare that, or to say that these are the kind of tools that we can use to live with the discomfort of life, essentially,
Yeah.
is something quite interesting.
Yes, yeah. And you know what? And I often say, I think we did discuss this in the first podcast we did, idea that a lot of religion, we need to relearn it, right?
Mm,
I just feel like there's so much beauty and power there in religion, but only if it's done right, if it's taught in the right way, right? And so, yeah, and fasting is another experience of that, which within it can carry the deepest teaching, psychological and spiritual teaching. But unfortunately, it goes, ignored in a lot of cases. And it's very interesting what you said as well. You sometimes, for example, before we think that right after iftar I have to eat, but then situations come where you don't eat for a while, and you see I'm okay with it, right? Similar thing happened to me. I had a live lecture right after iftar, so I only had time to do my maghrib, and then we had this live Zoom event, and it went on for an hour and a half. no problem whatsoever, right? I didn't even feel it. And it's so nice to have these experiences to remind ourselves
Mm.
that the reason we thought we couldn't do it is not that we're incapable. No, it's no, you cannot put anything in your mouth. It's not hard. It's that sometimes these thoughts take over, right? You have to eat. You have to eat. You cannot eat. You have to eat. And often it's the thought which makes us feel like we're incapable. Well,
I was
if
just about
something
to say,
happens, yeah,
sorry, but we limit ourselves based on our thoughts, and
exactly.
we don't realize the true extent of what we can. I mean, we have it here in the UK where we have such a diversity in terms of times of fasting. So
Hmm.
last year was longer fast than this year. So
Yeah,
if I could fast last year, obviously I can manage this year. But somehow,
yeah,
even when it's like we're fasting till 5 p.m., we're still struggling at
yeah,
4
yeah,
p.m. and like we're crawling over the line. It doesn't make any sense, but that's
yeah.
because our thoughts are limiting us, right?
Exactly. That's another way that we know our thoughts are not us. Exactly. You know, whenever the end of the fasting is, our thoughts pretend as if that's the limit of our ability, right? If
Yeah.
iftar was at 5, our thoughts would tell us you can only go till 5. And I don't know if you've discussed this, but you must have, I think, discussed it at some point on your podcast. You know that there's this David Huggins book, and he talks about, if I'm mentioning his name correctly, and there he talks about this idea that usually people stop at the 40% of their ability, right? Now, of course, he's looking at it from, I think, a physical point of view. I hope I'm saying his name right. Like, for example, when you want to do a push-up or sit-ups,
Yeah.
he says usually what stops us is the emotions and the thoughts. Is not that we're at the limit of our ability, right? He says at the point where a person stops, that's 40% of what they could have done. And the interesting thing is you can actually observe how thoughts stop you and emotions, right? Like, for example, if you wanted to do 40, from 35, you see these thoughts coming and he's feeling. But if you'd said, I want to do, for example, 30, it would have come maybe at 26 or 20. So we can see how these thoughts and emotions are actually taking over of our life, making us do things, making us not do things. And perhaps before talking about how we can go about and change this,
This is the bit I'm waiting for, by the way. You're just
yeah,
teasing me right now.
no, because you know why, Sadi? This is one of the beliefs I have, that before trying to change something, we need to be really fully convinced, right? Because there's been a lot of times in our life where we, for example, made a decision to change something, and that means that we are to some extent convinced, like we want the change. But if for example, we want it, let's say, a little bit, then after a while, its energy would run out and we'll go back to our bad habits. So it's very good to work. For example, if we have, I don't know, 2 weeks to change, just 1 week spending on why do I want to change, to, take this conviction deep in our heart, and then the next week start changing. So I think it's so important to realize to what extent this can help us, to what extent this would be beneficial for us, and
Mm.
also what would happen if we don't make this change, right? How we're limiting ourselves, how our life would be limited, how we're missing out on so much. So maybe even spending most of the time on how it's affecting us, and then a little bit on the change would be better. I think so. So just, is it okay if I talk a little bit about how much these things take over our life?
Yeah, go for it. I just think you're doing that like internet clickbait thing of you draw out the bit before for as long as possible and then give like a 2 minute answer at the end, so they have to listen to the whole thing. But no. I mean, obviously, like I think it's beneficial that we follow your logic and thinking on this. So please carry us on the journey. People just want to know how to change, and you're just making
Yes.
them suffer more.
Yes, yeah. No, honestly, that's not my intention. Even though I would have said I've learned from the best, but that's really not my intention. I genuinely believe the more it becomes clear, the easier it is to tackle. So, because they always say knowledge is the best healing power, right? If you know how something is created, you're not confused about it, right? Imagine, for example, a person who doesn't know his or her way around the kitchen, and on a phone call they have to do, okay, this is what you should do, right? turn this thing 50 degrees, 90 degrees, right? It's going to be very difficult to create a change. As soon as the first thing goes wrong, you don't know what to do. But if you've been in the kitchen, you know how it works, where the things are, how the machines work, you know, you can, even if a problem comes, you know how to deal with it. So if they just learn, if teach us a technique without us knowing the details of how things work, as soon as something goes wrong, that's it. We don't know what to do.
Okay, you sold me. You sold me.
Yeah.
Carry on.
So back to the idea of how these thoughts and emotions take over and to what extent they take over our life, we have to know that they can, you know, it's not just in one aspect of our life, for example, with regards to hunger. No, it's so many things, right? If we think about it, like I've lived at around 30 years, people may have lived differently. All these years, 30 years, some people 20, 40 years, there have been things which we have pushed down, right? Maybe in, I don't know, primary school, I was bullied and I couldn't deal with it. I pushed it down, right? So 30 years, 20 years, 15 years worth of unsolved trauma or unsolved heartbreaks or being bullied or insecurities, all of these are kept within us, right? They haven't gone anywhere. And so imagine we're living with 3 decades of past personal baggage. And it's not like they have no impact on it. No, they, in so many ways, control our life through these thoughts that they send to us and through the feelings they create within us, right? So we mentioned one example of it. Like if a person, for example, is insecure about their height, right? Not that you'd have that problem, you're quite tall yourself. Well, if a person is insecure about their height and this insecurity is kept in them, they are gonna, you know, this insecurity is gonna be triggered in so many situations, right? They may be out with a few friends, or they may be watching the movie in the cinema. They're so excited to go to the movies, but as soon as something in the movie triggers them, they immediately feel negative emotion, right? And so the next time the friends say, let's go to cinema, they already like, nah, I didn't feel good last time. And it's very interesting because the person may not even know what created that negative experience. I think I just don't feel good in cinemas, right? Because it's not always that we feel, it's this insecurity which created the emotion. Usually we just feel the outcome, which is that I feel bad, right? Or even with people, we're next to a good friend that we really like, and they're talking, and suddenly something they say triggers something in us, we feel bad. And slowly, if we don't know what is the source, we think it's the friend that's making us feel bad. We don't know, it's something inside me is triggered now. So I have to work on myself. But what we do is we like, next time we don't feel that good seeing this friend. So slowly, we can, leave great friends out of our life, great experiences. Why? Because when we felt when we were there, it triggered something in us and we didn't know what is the source of this negative emotion, and we felt it's them. So it can literally take our friends away from us, even our partners, right? For many people, they start a relationship and in the beginning, everything feels great, right? They can listen to each other. They can talk for hours without noticing time passing, right? Why does that happen? Because it just happens that out of all the people in this world, this partner or this friend is in a way that the things they're saying or the way they're talking is not, triggering an insecurity inside me, right? Now, maybe if they started talking about something else, it would have, but now they're not. And then this love is formed, this beautiful feeling is formed. And so we just want to spend time with them. But what happens is that after a few months, usually a lot of people say, right? There's this quote, which I really don't agree with, that unity or being together is the death of love. Why do they say that? Because as soon as people live together, after 3 months, 4 months, eventually they will say something or do something which would trigger something in me, right? Either an insecurity or a past memory. Maybe the way they have their tea, maybe the way they brush their teeth. There would be something that triggers a memory in me of something I didn't like or an insecurity, right? And I'll start feeling a negative emotion and I feel like, oh, the love is gone, because maybe love meant just feeling great, but now I'm feeling negative, so love is gone, right? So it can even take our love away from us. these thoughts and feelings that come. And it's very interesting. If we don't deal with this, it can really affect our relationships. And there are so many people who've been, for example, with their partner, and they feel like there's nothing there, right? And why is that? Because they kept, their partner maybe said things that triggered something in them. They didn't work with it. They didn't know how to deal with it. So they either became controlling. That is perhaps the root of why some couples become controlling. Because instead of working on myself to get rid of my insecurities, I'm like, I'm going to change you so that you don't do anything which triggers me, right?
Mm.
You don't say anything that goes with my insecurities. Maybe I'm insecure. Maybe I'm super sensitive about the way you talk about my parents. Maybe about this. Maybe about my career. So instead of me dealing with that, I'm going to make sure you act in a way that you don't say anything that triggers me. Not you, not your relatives, not your friends. So the person becomes controlling. Or another way some people deal with it is they don't become controlling, they become resentful. So the negative emotion comes, they're triggered, their insecurity or whatever is triggered. They think the source is the partner, but they don't want to be controlling, but they push it down as something about the partner. So slowly, a lot of resentment is built. Oh, I'm living with a person who did this to me. I'm living with a person with this, right? A lot of resentment. And anything you push down will come back. So usually even people who keep resentments, maybe after 10 years, they'll do something crazy or they'll just leave without saying anything, right? So these things can really impact us, right? Even our relationships, our marriages, our friendships. And if we don't deal with them, we don't know what's happening. We just find ourselves stopping our friendship with some friends. We just feel like, okay, I'm in love, and then the love is going, right? So we just feel like, what is happening to my life? We don't know exactly that all of this is run by things inside us. So that's why I said it's super important to know to what extent we are impacted by this. So when we want to change it, then we have more motivation.
I'm just waiting now for the change. How?
Yeah. Exactly.
Maybe it's the fasting, but I'm really eager to know, because as I said, like I think we can maybe bring in some of the habit related stuff in now, and then
Yeah, sure.
we can
Yeah, I think that's it.
long out before we speak about change right at the end. So
Sure.
so we mentioned the book The Power of Habit, which I've recently started listening to,
Yeah.
and I personally found, or I haven't actually finished it, but I found a lot of really interesting things in there. So the
Yeah,
first
yeah.
thing I mentioned earlier about how like so many of our actions are just pure habit now.
Hmm.
And there was another thing about the dopamine hit that we get in our bodies. So they basically break down, or the author breaks down habits into three separate bits. So you've got cues, routine, and reward. So the cue
Yeah.
is whatever triggers you to take out a certain action. The routine is the action itself, and the reward is whatever feeling you get inside or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
And based on research that they did initially, people are getting a dopamine hit after the reward phase, which is natural. You know, you do something, you feel good, that's your
Yeah.
dopamine. As it becomes more habitual, they're seeing a dopamine spike after the cue and before the routine, which means that you've been triggered to do something and already you're getting that feeling. So
Yeah.
now it's almost like, okay, well, I obviously now have to go through the motions, because this is,
Yeah.
and this is how your brain kind of works. Excuse me. And it's kind of remarkable. And like, this book has been really eye-opening for me personally, just in
Yeah.
terms of understanding how habits actually work in our body. And I recommend it. I haven't finished it, as I said, but I recommend people do check it out. I know it's quite a popular and famous book. If people haven't come across it, you can find it pretty much anywhere. There's also one other bit that I found really fascinating, which was about the different types of cue. And
Hmm.
all of the different cues are basically externally driven. So the five types that they have are location, time, emotional state, other people, or the last action you undertook. So
Hmm.
again, coming back to the beginning of our conversation,
Yeah.
if we consider our acts, and let's here, for example, talk about sins, if we're thinking of Ramadan and self-improvement and betterment,
Yeah.
if we think of our acts as habits, things that we've become
Yeah.
habituated, and people always talk about being habituated to sin, right?
Yeah.
um what's interesting is that even then, even though they're a part of us as we see it, the
Yeah.
cues are still all external. So it's still all about, for example, being in a particular place or a particular time of day, or being with a particular group of friends, or
Yeah.
just the fact that you've been doing a series of things that have led you here. Which
Yeah.
means that actually and listen, I haven't got to the change bit of the book either yet.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm hoping you'll be able to provide a robust enough argument. But
Yeah.
for us to be able to change what we're doing, we need to be able to appreciate and understand our cues. And a lot of it comes down to that self-reflection bit, right? The first half of it, which is being alone with ourselves and starting to really dig deep and understand it. And again, this is why I feel that there are so many hadith about the importance of reflection and understanding oneself. He who knows himself knows his Lord, for example, is a
Sure.
hadith that's out there.
Yeah. Yeah.
I say it so flippantly because I don't know the reference. I'm sorry, the hadith exists somewhere, you know,
No, it's من
it's there.
عرف نفسه فقد عرف ربه. Yeah.
Thank you very much. You see, with a bit of Arabic, you make it sound so much more legitimate.
Exactly. That's
But
the
no,
trick.
but yeah, so
Okay, sure. So should we
habits.
start with maybe the change from a psychological point of view, which the book also talks about how to change habits,
Yeah,
and then maybe we can even go a level deeper, because the technique for habit changing that this book and other books suggest, which has proven to be in so many ways useful and successful, is trying to change a habit and turn it into another habit. So what they do is they try to, as you said, the habit has three levels, right? So cue, routine, and reward. So what they do is they try to intervene at the level of cue and give the person another routine that would bring about the same
the
reward,
same reward. Yeah,
right? So for example, if they realize that, okay, this person has a porn addiction or a smoking addiction, alcohol addiction, and it's very interesting because they say that a lot of the time it's not that the reward they're looking for is the physical feeling they get, for example, from the alcohol or from whatever substance. Is it maybe the boredom, that was their way of dealing with boredom or with loneliness, right? So the reward is just not to feel that boredom or not to feel that loneliness.
yeah,
And so they realize, okay, so in this case, for the person, boredom or loneliness becomes the cue, and the reward they're expecting is just not feel that way. So they're like, okay, what we need to do is to give this person another routine, so as soon as the cue comes, through another routine they can get the same reward, right? So for example, that's why they say in some groups who they're trying to quit alcohol, they're like, as soon as you felt like the need for it, so the cue came, which is, for example, you wanted to be around people, you wanted that social environment of the pub or just drinking, go to these group meetings we have. We'll give you that sense of social aspect, so you're getting the reward, but through a different routine. And they say, well, slowly, as you try to, every time the cue happens, you go to the second routine, slowly, this new habit would take over. And so this is the technique they use, and it's very interesting and very good. But the main part of this, the most difficult part of it, is to be able to identify the cues in life, because those are very difficult, right? So if you, for example, ask a person, and this addiction can be anything. For some people, can be just going on Twitter, right? So so the person has to look at their life and try to identify what are the times in my day where I'm triggered or cued to go and use Twitter. And sometimes they have these cue logs where they write down, for example, during the day, these 10 times, this is when I felt the urge to go on Twitter. For example, this time I felt lonely. This time I felt sad. So it can be so many different things that the person is trying to avoid. And it's a little bit difficult to identify these. Okay, maybe I just felt stress. I wanted to push the stress away or distract myself from it. So I used Twitter as this, or I used Instagram. So the first step is to just like go through your day and write it. Okay, every time I did this action, what cued it? Was it stress? Was it boredom? What was it? And then you're like, okay, If I can remove, for example, the cue from my life, well, that would be great. So that's why, for example, a lot of people who are trying to go on weight loss plans, they say, well, don't keep these beautiful chocolates in the house, because that's an external cue which you can easily, at least for a while, get rid of till the habit becomes less strong, right? Or for example, with people who have alcohol addictions, they say don't keep alcohol at home, but that's a very important part of it.
Mm.
So certain cues you can remove, but certain cues you can't, like the feeling of boredom, right? At least you can't like take your boredom and put it in someone else's house. So you have to have a list of it, and then slowly trying to learn how to find substitutes to deal with that. So this is basically, and of course there's so many details, and everyone can, of course, if it's very serious for them, they can always take the help of a therapist that can
Yeah.
guide them through. It's the best thing always to seek help from therapists, and there are psychologists whose expertise is in helping people change habits, get rid of
Eating
bad
addiction and
habits.
whatever else. Yeah.
Exactly. So that's always the best source, because these are not easy to deal with on our own. Yeah.
There was actually the part of the book that I'm at right now is
Yeah.
talking about Alcoholics Anonymous and the system they have. And the story that he was just kind of telling of one of the guys was that he had been in and out of AA several times. He would go to a few meetings, you know, he would have all of the replacement routines for the cues,
Yeah.
and what did it for him and what did it for other people as well was actually, and this is what I found really interesting, and I always find when you read self-help type books and stuff about behavioral science and whatever else, it's almost like they skirt around the topic of God or a higher being without
Yeah.
like fully jumping in. And so what was
Yeah.
really interesting was that for this gentleman in particular, after one of the meetings on his like latest attempt at going back to the AA, he
Yeah.
was asked to help put the chairs away after the session. And
Yeah.
and it's such a small thing, and it took 5 minutes to do, but he got a good feeling out of doing something that was not indulging in his own base desires, if that makes sense, and like being
Mm-hmm.
helpful. and
Mm-hmm.
and he just kind of built on that. And so this is something that the book talks about, and I think I it makes sense to me as well, that like when you find other rewards, so for example, and you focus on them, so for example, people looking to lose weight,
Yeah.
if you weigh yourself regularly, and funny enough, so I've got a digital scale and I weigh myself like pretty much daily, but one of the things
Yeah.
the app actually says, and it makes sense now, but the app says that people who weigh themselves more than 15 times a day lose more weight than people who weigh themselves less frequently.
Yes. Yeah.
And what the book then said to me a couple of days ago, I'm saying says to me because it was I'm listening to it rather than reading it. I hate the guy's voice, by the way. That on Amazon, that I really don't like the guy who's
Yeah.
narrating the book. But anyways, that's the thing.
He
So
did his best. Yeah.
well, I think he overdid it anyways, it's a
Yeah.
separate issue. If you listen to
Yeah.
the book, you'll know what I mean. He does like different
Yeah.
voices for
I
male,
see. I see.
female, and adds too much
I see.
emotion.
Yeah.
Anyways, so what somebody said was that they found that focusing on the feeling of weighing themselves and seeing that number go down was
Yeah.
the kind of impetus they needed to continue weight loss. Does
Yeah.
that make sense? So
Yeah.
it's not. It's also about finding. So yes, you were talking about replacements, but also focusing on things other than um, the
Yeah. Yeah.
initial act, and
Exactly.
a lot of it. And when they talk about AA, they talk about God or a higher power, but they
Yeah.
don't really subscribe to it, if you know what I
Yeah.
mean.
Yeah. No,
Um,
yeah, yeah, definitely. And I love this as a segue. Um, yeah, so true. Also, what you said with the weight loss, it's very interesting. Just in brackets, they say the reason why weighing yourself helps because that gives you a reward, right? So it gives you a reward and it helps you feel the success you've had. And of course, positive emotion comes from going towards goal. So that's great. But the problem is that sometimes weight loss doesn't happen, like every day you lose weight. Sometimes you lose weight 2 days, and the third day, even you're on a diet, it may be, you may go through a plateau or something.
mm,
So one of the psychologists, what he has done is that he was like, okay, we can't tell people don't go on a scale for a week, because if they don't go, they won't get reminded, they won't get the reward. So many things they lose out. So it's created a weight that doesn't show you your weight. So you go on it, and it gives you a positive right, like a green light, that you weighed yourself. You remind yourself that you're on a diet, but it doesn't show your weight, because if it shows, you may get, for example, disappointed. It's very interesting how, with the science, you can actually help yourself. But what I loved about yourself, sorry, about what you said, and of course there are so many things I love about yourself, but about what you said,
Yeah.
I think the fasting is slowly taking it, kicking in.
We're getting closer to iftar time, so I think
Yeah.
as time goes on, we're gonna struggle more and more.
Yes. So this idea that they don't address God or a higher being or these things, anything that has to do with us being more than a machine, more than an animal.
Yeah.
Whereas a lot of the times this is very important. As you said, for that person in the story you mentioned, he did something by just, I don't know, organizing the room, or what you said, and
Yeah.
he
Putting away the
felt
chairs.
something about himself, right? He felt it. And this is very, very important, because we need to know we are valuable, we have some worth, right? Before we feel like, okay, this person is, worth spending time and difficulty of changing, right? Because change could be very difficult, especially if addictions become strong. And if they just, well, you're just another animal, you're just another human being, it doesn't mean much, right? Like, why should I spend time changing this, going through all that difficulty? But as soon as you realize your worth, right? This is why in a lot of religions, there's so much emphasis on the fact that, oh, hey, human being, you're important. They either say you're created in the image of God, or in Islam, they say you're Khalifatullah. They want you to know how important you are, because you have to know that you are so important that makes all the difficulty you'll go through to change yourself makes worth it, right? So that's one thing which I think we can go deeper than the psychological discussion, even though it's perfect. The psychological discussion is amazing, but now we can try to go a little bit deeper. That's first thing. Second thing is, the idea in a lot of these psychological approach to these habit changing is that, okay, there's something about you which is not nice, let's change it with something else, right? But first of all, who is deciding what is good, what is bad? And secondly, you haven't taught me how to get rid of habits. You've just taken one habit from me
And
and you've
replace it.
given me another habit.
Mm.
So a lot of people may actually lose weight, but they become addicted to the gym or to a
Mm.
certain level of eating. And ultimately, if you look at it, it may not lead to more happiness or a better life, right? Because any addiction can become damaging. And one of the issues I see with a lot of books which are now becoming very popular is that the person has managed to fix something in their life. For example, they were overweight, and of course, if that was harming their health, that's bad. Otherwise, that's again another thing by the society. So they try to get rid of that, but they become addicted on their health. They became addicted to it, to the extent that they didn't pay any attention to their family. So the person says, I'm 14 and I'm divorced, and I haven't seen my family. I neglected my children, and they were celebrating this person as a success, right? How is that possible is beyond me. Or the person never spent time in it on his intellectual growth, on his spiritual growth. So from one habit, we took one habit from him, gave him another habit, and said, okay, go and deal with this, because this does less damage to society. Or I don't know if it even does. But what the spiritual approach to this tries to do is try and see, why do habits form in the first place? And secondly, well, you decided to replace this by another habit. Who told you you even want the second one, right? What told you that you like this lifestyle? Wasn't that another thought? So you basically changed part of your life, which was created by some thought, to another thing, which is again decided by thoughts. Who even said you want this, or this is good for you, right? So now you're stuck again in another habit, which may not be you. Because a lot of people, for example, they may say, you know what, I'll try to fix it by focusing on my career or on this or on that. Well, who said that's what you want? And one of the most difficult questions is not to say what I want, what I really want. Because usually when I say what I want is what the thoughts tell me what I want. And
Hmm.
the thoughts are only trying to make sure I don't get triggered, right? So if, for example, I'm secure about talking to my landlord as a person who's renting, my thought would tell me that I want to buy a house. Whereas if I go deep down, I don't need to buy a house. I just need to be okay, deal with the stress of talking to your landlord. And you realize that you didn't need to spend 20 years of your life, you
Saving.
know, saving, stressing over, and if I would never be happy if I don't own a house. No.
Yeah.
So what you really want is different to what you want. And this is why the the spiritual way of changing habits goes deeper. So again, you have to notice the cue like you would do in the psychological way, but now it doesn't tell you that you need to change it with another routine. It tells you, try to experience the cue, right? So go to the moment where you're cued, where you're triggered, and sit with that, right? Learn to be okay with that and heal yourself at that level. And with some addictions, it may be very strong because the pattern that we've created after the cue is so strong that we may even feel like we don't have free will, even though we do. But it says start from easier places, right? That's the whole reason we spoke about fasting in the beginning, right? It says sit with the cue and learn, grow spiritually, and learn how to just sit with it, experiencing it without feeling the need either to express it or suppress it, right? Because the whole psychological technique was you have to suppress it, but just suppress it in a less damaging way. So it's still, sorry, express it.
Hmm.
You have to express it, but through a less damaging way, right? So, but this one says, sit with it and learn that in addition to expressing and suppressing, there is another way, just allowing it to be, right? And it's very interesting because the more you do this, the less strong it becomes. And slowly, slowly, you see that all these patterns that you had created, slowly, slowly, they lose power, they fade away, right? And it may take time, but it works, and it works beautifully. Like, for example, with anger, right? People have managed to heal their anger. It may take them a year, but they have finally done it,
C-
right?
Can I ask
Yes,
a sorry, quick question? When you
sure,
talk
sure.
about sitting with whatever it is in that queue,
Yeah,
and healing, w- it might sound like a weird question, but practically, how do you do that? Because it's one thing
sure.
to sit in that state, but then what are we doing from like a spiritual, religious perspective? Are we doing dhikr of Allah? Are we, what, like how you know what I mean? What do we do?
Sure, sure. So let me say it first in a universal spiritual way,
Yeah.
because, and then I'll link it to Islam as well. All of this are in Islam as well, definitely. So let's say we can either use the example of sexual temptation. Maybe a person has porn addiction, right? Or anger. In either case, what I mean by sit with it is that next time that urge, either to lash out in anger or act according to your porn addiction, comes, you try to see what is happening inside you, right? Because before this, what would happen was that, okay, the urge is coming, it means I want to do this, right? I need to do this. I either need to go on that website or I need to shout at this person and say whatever is in my head, right? So I feel this is me. But slowly, slowly, as you practice, you're like, okay, this is not me. This is happening inside me. This is an urge which has come now. So when I say sit with it, is I mean, first of all, observe what is happening. For example, when you're experiencing this urge, what happened inside you? So you see, okay, certain parts of my body may, for example, if it's anger, my heart is beating faster, right? My throat feels a certain way. Certain thoughts are coming to my mind. So when I say observe it, it's just experience when you say I'm angry or I need to go and do this thing. What are you actually saying? All you're saying is that I'm having these urges inside my body, these emotions and these thoughts, right? And then You can slowly talk to yourself, right? So the thoughts would tell you, for example, that, you know what, if you don't right now go and watch porn, you'll never be happy. But if you do it, you'll be super happy. It'll be amazing. This is all I need to be happy, right? And you can talk to that thought. First of all, know that is not you and talk to it. Okay, well, you're saying I'll be happy. Is that so? Well, last time I did it make me happy? Well, a little bit, maybe for a little while, maybe for a little bit, yeah. But afterwards, I didn't feel happy, right? So you just sit with it, try to communicate with it, and observe what is happening inside your body in terms of emotions and feelings. And it's very interesting. By just engaging with it this way, it loses a lot of the energy it had, because most of its energy and the fact that it makes you do things is two. One is the surprise element. You're going on, with your life. Suddenly, something you see a cue, and a lot of the times we even notice something is a cue because we don't know what triggers it in us. So the cue happened, and you're surprised by being overwhelmed by all of this need to do something. And also, it's very mysterious. Oh my God, I was living my life. Suddenly now I think the most important thing I have to do is either to get angry or to go on this website or whatever. But by sitting with it, experiencing it, the surprise element is gone. You may, in fact, actually expect it. Oh, you came. Well, and also it's no longer mysterious anymore. All you are is a few feelings and emotions in my body, and you're sending some thoughts, which I know I'm not myself, right? So the more you practice, especially if we start from things which are easier, right? Like if they haven't become to a very strong addiction, we realize that, yeah, we can sit with an uncomfortable experience and let it pass. So that's what I mean by sitting with it. You're just experiencing it as it is. And of course, it may take time. It's not going to be happening in one go. Like, you just gone, oh, sit with it, done. I'm over with anger. It takes time. It may take a year, 2 years, 3 years. But slowly, we can heal ourselves like this. And not just this, we can heal everything else, right? You know how I said insecurities, or for example, past memories about being bullied or being hurt, so all of this, the next time it comes, instead of telling your partner, don't speak that way, or trying to change the external world, go down and try to sit with that. Okay, so the whole reason I got offended was that this small feeling came in my heart, or this thought came to my mind. That's all it was. And I thought I would never go to that community again, or I would never go to those friends again. No, I don't need to do any of that. All I need to do is to just let this come out, sit with it, and then as you sit with it, it's done. The energy is released, and so you're healed. Now, if we want to link this with God, by the way, are we out of time?
No. I mean, we've gone over an hour. But I'm enjoying this, so keep going.
Okay, so I just think it's nice because it's the Muslim vibe to now link it to Allah a little bit.
Yeah.
Now it's very interesting in our spiritual teachings, Islamic spiritual heritage. There is this beautiful line I love, is that use sins or temptations as an opportunity to remember God. It's beautiful, right? Usually we are brought up in a way, because I said our religious teachings, so the way they've taught us about our religion sometimes is very wrong. The way they've taught us about religion is that if you feel yourself doing something wrong, if you catch yourself with temptation, a lot of the times all we feel is shame and guilt, right? So not only we need to deal with the urge of the temptation, we also now have the guilt and the shame. And it's so much to deal with. So what we do is we either suppress or express. We can't just sit with all of these at once. But when you look at our actual religion, the sources, it's so beautiful. There's no shaming, right? God always talks to people who are dealing with either sins or problems in a very loving way. Why? Because if you have guilt as well, now you have to, on top of sitting with that temptation or anger, sit with your guilt. And then it affects your self-worth, everything. So all the things which are totally terrible for a habit change, right? Psychologically, we said you need to feel you're worth something, you're more than that. So if someone says, no, you are your sins, you're going to get punished, you're not wanted anymore. This is the worst thing we can tell a person. But in our literature, that's not. For example, we have this line, it says, "عادته الإحسان إلى المسيئين." It's in God's custom, God's way, God's habit is to be nice to those who make mistakes, right? Or in another hadith we have, at the moment where you feel a temptation, remember God. It's very beautiful. Use that as an opportunity, actually. What they're trying to do is they're trying to make you become aware of the cue, right? When it says the moment you feel the temptation, remember God, it tries to tell you that be aware of the cue, catch yourself as soon as the cue happens. And then why does it say remember God? Because it wants you to have more things that you have in your awareness, right? Now imagine I'm dealing with these emotions inside me, right? I'm becoming, for example, tempted to do something. I have to deal with all of this, that, oh, I need to do this act. It's so difficult. And before, I would feel a lot of shame as well. But now I'm sitting with this temptation, but I remember, oh, wow, I can still have my connection with God, right? Actually, and then you see that slowly, anytime this happens, you remember God immediately, and that just helps you if you feel that God is forgiving, that God is loving, which God is. We have hadiths that God is actually yearning for the sinners to look towards Him. So it's very beautiful that it tries to catch you at the moment of cue to give you energy then. Right? God says, I want to be with you at that moment, to help you there, to send you love. And so in so many ways, you see that this has been in our tradition, this sitting with temptations as soon as they arise. But now I just want to link this to something a little bit more, and then that will be my last one because I don't want to make this so long. This idea, what happens after you slowly heal yourself? This is maybe the most beautiful part of it, right? Because as I said, now we have so many things inside us which trigger us. Even if it's not a sin, it's still bad. Like I always give this example because it really helps. You're talking to a friend and he says, you know what? I finally called my grandma who's been under lockdown as well, and I feel so good about it. After 2 weeks, I called grandma. So send some love to her. And your friend is telling you, so what should be your reaction? Oh, be happy for him. Lovely. Well done. But let's say you have this guilt inside yourself for not calling your grandma, right? Or your uncle. So he's talking, it triggers the guilt inside you, and it sends all these thoughts to your head that, oh, damn it, I didn't call my grandma, right? So your friend is looking at you. He's like, I told you something nice about, what I did. And your face is so sad. What's going on, right? You can't enjoy the discussion with your friend because it triggered the guilt inside you, right? So that's why a lot of the times we get bored when we're talking with our friends because we're not listening to them. We're listening to the voice in our mind. But imagine what would have happened if I had healed my guilt, right? When the guilt came up, I just sat with it, experienced it, didn't suppress it, healed it. He would tell me the good news. I called grandma and I would just feel good for him. There wouldn't be a voice in my head, I didn't need to listen to two things at the same time. No, there would be no guilt inside me. So no thought would come to my head that you need to call grandma too. So I could just be there for my friend, be happy for him. Now, if you pay attention to a lot of relationships, you see that's exactly what happens. After a while, it becomes so difficult to talk to each other. Like the couples who in the beginning, they could go and talk for hours and hours and hours without notice the passing of time. Now she's talking or he's talking and the other one's all talking about work and thinking about work or about this stress. And obviously you can't enjoy this relationship. So if you heal yourself, you realize that you can connect to people like the first day, for example, you met them, because they say things and there's nothing inside you that will get triggered. You've healed the stress, you've healed the anger, you've healed the guilt, you've healed the shame, you've healed the fear, the insecurities. You're talking and no thought comes to your mind, and you can give all of your CPU to this person and experience their love, which is, why we have that beautiful poem that says, don't go out and seek for love. Rather, remove the barriers you've put in yourself against love, right? Because with all these things I'm keeping inside myself, the insecurities, the guilt, everything, there may be a person standing next to me who loves me so much, but as soon as they say something, part of me gets triggered. I feel insecure, I feel guilt, I feel fear, right? So the love is coming, but I have within me so many things that are competing with that love, so I don't feel it. I feel stressed, I feel insecure. But as soon as I remove these, the person is talking to me and nothing is coming from inside me, no negative thought, no stress. So I feel their love, right? I receive their love. And another interesting thing with which I want to end, and it links back to the hadith you mentioned, man arafa nafsah faqad arafa rabbah. When you slowly try to go down and heal the insecurities you have, all of this, the stress, the fears, memories from primary school where you were bullied. When you heal all of this, what happens is very beautiful. You realize that you have a level even deeper than them, right? So far we were saying that, my friend, in addition to what you think you are, you also have parts of you which is hidden, where you have some memories, you have insecurities, all of that. But now I'm saying remove those, heal those, and you will see that you have a level even deeper than that, which is what I call the true self, right? And it's very interesting. Once you heal yourself, once you get connected to yourself, you realize that at that level, you were already connected to God. God is between an individual and his or her heart, right? So we always had this connection with God, right? We're closer to you than your jugular vein. So at the deepest level, we are already connected to God. It's just that the love and connection coming from God in the middle has to go through all these baggages that we have, right? And by the time it reaches us, it has changed. It has changed. So it has been wrapped around so many desires, wrapped around so many insecurities. By the time it comes to us, we don't feel it's God. And this is why in the Quran, one of the job description of evil is tazyin, which means that it changes things, it decorates things, right? So the actual energy was coming from God, but by the time it went through our insecurities and fears and addictions, what we felt had no color of God anymore, right? It was wrapped around something else. But when you heal yourself, you realize that within you, you are already connected to God, and it's very beautiful because you feel so much connection. The people who've done this, they say that the way it feels is as if all the things you were looking for in your life, you have them all at once and more. All the love you were seeking, all the happiness you were seeking, you already had that inside you, at the ground of your being, at the deepest level of who you are. And this is why they say, man arafa nafsah faqad arafa rabbah. Because the one who knows himself is the one, or herself, is the one who's healed herself, has gone all the way to this deepest layer. And if you go there, you already feel the connection to God. That's it. Because at the core of who we are, we are connected to God. We're not separate, right? نحن أقرب إليه من حبل الوريد. And it's very, and so this is why I said it's deeply connected to Islam, all of this. And yeah, that's it.
That was incredibly deep, and I don't want to lighten the mood too much, but I when you were talking, I was kind of thinking of the Matrix, and you know how Neo, like when he is the one, and all of a sudden, like, it starts off with him kind of searching for everything and wanting all the
Yeah,
answers, and then at the end
yeah,
he's like dodging bullets and whatever else. So to
yeah.
conclude this podcast, we can dodge bullets if we take your advice. Is that an apt summary, do you reckon?
Yeah, I guess so. I guess. Is it okay, by the way? Is it okay if I just say one more thing?
I'm not going to stop you. I'm happy to carry on talking. You
You
wanna
wouldn't
you wanna
hate
call
that.
it a day.
Just one more thing, because this helped me a lot and has helped a lot of people. And I just want to share it because I wish someone had told me this. It took me 30 years to learn this. So, the thing is, at the deepest level of who we are, I said we have this connection, right? And you don't need to believe me. Just try it for yourself and see if this happens or not, right? No one needs to take this for granted. It doesn't need iman. Just do it and see if it happens or not. But what they say is this. So at the core of who we are connected to God. And that is a source of unconditional love, bliss, and connection. And so Everything we do in life is to experience that. This is very interesting. This is built in us because we already have that at the core of who we are, right? So the way this core is communicating with us is that you have this lost thing, which is there deep inside you. So everything we do in life, we are actually trying to get back to there, because what has happened is that we have tasted the sweetness of having this, right? In Quran, for example, it says, am I not your Lord? Well, maybe the way we can interpret this is that we have tasted what it means to receive unconditional love and connection to God, because we have this at the deepest level of who we are, even right now, at this very moment. But what's happened is that this is now veiled, according to Islamic literature. They say it's veiled by all this garbage we have kept inside us. However, the promise is still there that you can at some point be unconditionally happy. But because we don't know how in life, we go on seeking things, right? So I say, if I have this job, if I have, for example, that promotion, if I get married to this beautiful girl or beautiful guy, or this smart girl or this smart guy, or this or that, I will be fully happy. Why do we think this? Where did this idea that I can be fully happy come from? Because we know this is possible, but the problem is we don't know how this is possible. It's possible by going inside, whereas we keep looking for it outside. And the challenge is this, that when we desire something, we give it this quality, that with this, I would be fully happy. So it becomes ultimate concern. So a person may be addicted, I don't know, to eating or to porn or to alcohol. And when they are experiencing that desire, what's going in their subjective experience is that, oh, this is the most important thing in the world. If only I could have this, right? Or when someone's in love with someone and they can't have them, so the desire becomes so strong, the person almost take the form of a god for them. Or even alcohol, right? I really want you. And I always ask myself, okay, I get it, body or mind, you want this. But why is this so important to you? Why is it almost in the form of a god to you? If I don't go on this website, I will die. If I don't marry this person, I will die. And I realized, because we know ultimately that there is something which is like that, which can make us unconditionally happy, unconditionally connected, when life would suddenly make sense, that we would feel enough, and that is God, right? So we had that, but now we're looking for the examples of it, so things keep becoming God to us.
So are you saying that we're looking for that again? We're trying to refine that connection with God?
Yeah. And exactly. And because we're looking for that, everything that our mind tells us this is it takes the form of God. It's not a desire. To us, it becomes almost as a God, right? And this is why in the Quran says that, have you not seen those who take their desires as their ilah? Man ittakhadha, I think, ilahahu hawa, something like this. And this suddenly made so much sense to me, why we become so powerless in the face of an addiction. Because we're kind of worshiping it. Sometimes it can be a person or a job or whatever, alcohol. Because we're giving the quality of God to it, the quality that we experience with God, and we already have it at the deepest level of who we are. And this is why, I'll finish with this. Alhamdulillah, in the Quran, we have Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. I think last podcast, you were actually, like you said, Subhanallah. Now talk about Alhamdulillah.
Now you're doing it. Thank you.
So, Alhamdulillah means all the praise is due to God. Well, okay, what does that even mean? It means this, that every time you felt something is beautiful, every time you desired something, you actually are looking for that ultimate source of desire and beauty, which is already inside you because of that connection with God. So that's the only way it can make sense to say Alhamdulillah. Because ultimately the beauty comes from within you. Anything you liked was because it triggered something inside you, or it didn't trigger something inside you, so God's love could come out, right? So anything I saw and I liked, that feeling of I like it, that beauty was in me. Maybe another person would look at it and couldn't see the beauty. the source of all the beauty I saw in the world, the source of all the desires I had was because of the thing which I have at the core of who I am, that connection with God, right? Because another person can look at the same thing and not find it beautiful, right? So all the beauty, all the things you desire were already inside you and from God, from your connection to God. So every time you saw something, alhamdulillah, you have to say that every beauty I saw in the world was actually reminding me of the beauty I had seen with God. And it's very interesting. We have another line, Ya muna qulub al-mushtaqin. You are the wish of every person who desires. Every person who ever desires anything is actually looking for God. Why? Because anytime I desire something, what am I doing? I'm trying to change the world so I don't get triggered, so I feel good, right? So ultimately, every desire is there to give me a good feeling. So whatever you're looking for is you're looking for that good feeling. If you want a better car, why? So you feel good. Better job, so you feel good. So everything you're looking for, every desire you have is to feel good. And the source of all the good feelings is inside you, and that's God. So in everything you were looking for, in everything you desired, you were desired to feel good. And that feeling comes as a result of connection with God, ultimately. And that's what it means, that in everything we seek, we were looking for God, right? Because we wanted that connection that we already have. We're just become blind to. And so I think maybe it's a good place to end.
You've you've kicked this conversation into seventh gear and then said, right, let's call it a day. No, I think obviously we definitely need to get you back on, and I think continue this conversation, because it's fascinating, and I think from my own perspective, just the fact that I've been reading this book over the last couple of weeks, The Power of Habit, and to then address it and approach it, because when I'm reading books like this, which isn't very often, by the way, like I mean, I'm not like too into these kind of books, but with Ramadan, I thought, let me try and do something a little bit different. But whenever I have read books like this in the past, I'm always trying to fill in the gaps, the Islamic gaps, that is, because as we mentioned, right, they'll only go so far, and they'll use the science and they'll use theories and whatever else, but then we have like so much wisdom in our religion, and I think like I can probably scrap reading the rest of this book and move on, because you provided almost like an alternative path with regards to habit realignment, or just, you know, how we deal with our habits and whatever else, which for me sits a lot better than what they're kind of putting across in the book. I probably will finish the book just out of interest and intrigue, but I think always from an Islamic perspective, it's important and refreshing to try and seek out the kind of knowledge and wisdom that you've put across today, that exists in our spiritual tradition. As you mentioned, like these aren't your words necessarily, or it's your words, but it's not your messaging, right?
It's my understanding of our heritage. It's all been there. It's all been there in our religion. Exactly. Yes.
But no, that's why, I mean, it's great that you're able and happy and willing to share that with us. And I know that people will benefit, inshallah, a lot from this conversation, and that we can have many more, and that you don't take like 4 months to say yes before I ask you next time.
It will be my pleasure. It will be my pleasure. It's an honor to be invited. Thank you so much.
But thank you once again for sharing everything. I feel like we are jumping off a cliff here. We've ended very abruptly after you kind of kept bringing us up, but you know, it's been an hour and a half, and yeah, we don't want to turn this into like a Lord of the Rings type podcast.
I think,
go on.
Yeah, I think it's good I think people can continue the rest of it in you know, with themselves. I think we've given them, maybe, hopefully, inshallah, good food for thoughts, or
and I'll be putting I'll put your email address. I'll put your email address in the description, so everyone can just have you as their mentor through this process. But no, thank you once again, Sheikh Javad. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a great pleasure.